Thank you for joining AIGA Baltimore, Stevenson University, and Society of Design Arts for this online event with Tré Seals. We're gonna wait a couple of minutes until everyone, and so we can give people time to join us. Welcome, and we would really like to know where you're joining from. We know that we have people from several states in the US, you know, especially since we are Baltimore based, we have a lot of people from Baltimore. And we also know that we have people from outside of the US. So, hi. Oh, we have Steve from Ohio. Hi, Steve. Oh, hi, Kathy from Maryland. Thank you for joining us. Hi, Jamie from Germany. Awesome. Oh, Cozy from Argentina. Amazing. Welcome. Hannah from Baltimore. Hi, Hannah. Hi, everyone. So for who are joining us now, thank you. This event is sponsored by AIGA Baltimore, Stevenson University, and Society of Design Arts. And we're gonna have a presentation by Tré Seals, who founded Vocal Type. We're gonna be introducing Tré soon. Hi, Nivali from Annapolis. Hello. Thank you. It's really great that you're taking time out of your days to join us for this presentation. My name is Raquel Castedo. I'm part of AIGA Baltimore's board as the Society of Design Arts liaison. So the Society of Design Arts, it's also known as SODA. And we're gonna have Richard Stanley talking a little bit about SODA soon, and also Valerie talking about AIGA. So, hi Valerie, how are you?
Hey Raquel, doing well.
Hello, this event is part of AIGA's Baltimore Design Month. And last week we started the conversation with Tré about his work on Instagram. We invite you to check the video on Instagram TV with the interview. It was like a half an hour conversation about, you know, a little bit of his life, his work, his inspirations, and it's really cool to know more about Tré today. Check AIGA Baltimore's profile to see the interview from last week. And today Tré is gonna give a 30-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute presentation, and then we're gonna have some space for some questions from you, from the audience. So if you have questions at any time, please include your questions using the Q&A feature. And Krystal from AIGA Baltimore's board is gonna be helping us to curate the questions today. So Valerie, would you like to talk a little bit about AIGA Baltimore?
Sure, thank you. So I just wanted to let everybody know before we do the intros that we are recording this presentation. So those of you who aren't able to catch the whole thing can check out our Vimeo page later and catch the rest of it. If you do have questions, please ask them in the Q&A panel or section of Zoom. And then, yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you have just general comments, you want to type them in the chat, that's fine too. All right. So for those of you who aren't aware, AIGA is a national organization, the Professional Association for Design. AIGA Baltimore is one chapter of that larger association. And I just wanted to start by thanking SODA and Stevenson Arts Alive for all of their hard work in making this event possible. We do love collaborating with other local creative groups and universities. So if anybody up there has an idea for collaboration, please let us know. I also wanted to give a special shout out to Raquel and Krystal Carpentieri from our AIGA Baltimore board, who reached out to Tré and have been, you know, integral in bringing this event to life. So thank you to you too. So as the largest professional association of designers in the world, AIGA is committed to advancing the value and impact of design both locally and globally. We work together to inspire, support, and learn from each other at every stage of our career. And we have currently 75 chapters. We're run 100% by volunteers, and we serve approximately 20,000 members across the nation. I am the current chapter president of AIGA Baltimore, and our initiatives include things like diversity, equity, inclusion, design for democracy, design for good, women lead, our in-house initiative, and Emerge 2.0, which is for up-and-coming designers. You can learn more about those initiatives at aiga.org. And we are currently looking for volunteers and other board members. So if you're interested in getting involved, either maybe it's a one-time design or helping out with a specific event, let us know. Krystal is going to put the email address in there in the chat for us. If you want to reach out. We also are looking for specific board members. So our DEI efforts, we'd like to find a chair for that, someone for programming, and we're also looking for a community partnership chair. And then I just wanted to give a special shout out to any of the other chapter leaders, members, and representatives from our national board and organization for joining us today. And like Raquel said, this is part of our first ever Baltimore Design Month. We have a full month of events, and so you can check out our website for all of those event listings. We also have a few other community events that we shout out. AIGA Unidos, which is our Latinx group that has formed, is still putting on events this week for Hispanic Heritage Talks. So that you got to check out those events. And then at the end of the event today, we will list a few specific links to events this week. So I wanted to pass it over to Richard Stanley of SODA for him to give a little overview of what SODA is. Richard?
Thank you, Valerie. Welcome. It's a rainy day here in Baltimore. I hope it's sunny where you are, and it's really great to see as many people from as many different places as we have. That's always a lot of fun to see. As long as we're thanking people, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of the planning committee for SODA, especially Raquel and some of the others. And I'd like to also do a special shout out to Farhad Hadarian, who's our unsung hero that manages our mailing list. So I'd like to keep Farhad busy and have you all go to sodabaltimore.com and sign up for the mailing list. That's the best way to keep up to date on what we're coming up with for future events. If you're new to SODA Baltimore, I'd like to give you a little bit of a background. About 15 years ago, a group of students, teachers, and designers decided to further investigate the history of design in its many different aspects. Since those days were primarily analog and print, we had an interest in graphic design, illustration, advertising, a number of other things. But that quickly expanded to include architecture, industrial design, exhibition design, as well as a lot of very unusual sidelights, such as colors in antiquity, patent medicine labels, the medical illustration field, a number of different things like that. In fact, if you'd like to see a cross-section of all of the different things that we've done over the past few years, go to the SODA Baltimore website and check out the past events. There's a lot of posters in there that will give you an idea of the spectrum of material that we've covered in these programs. We're an all-volunteer organization, and we are always looking for more ideas and more help. So if you're interested in joining us on the planning committee, and we have some international members now, which we're really happy to see, let us know. We'd be happy to have you help us out. Coming up in the near future, we've got some really interesting programming coming up. Details are being ironed out, and that will all be on the website as well. So if you'd like to keep up with what we're doing, go to sodabaltimore.com and check all that sort of thing out. That's about it. I'd like to not seal any opportunities here to talk about his work, and so I'll turn it back over to Raquel.
Thank you, Richard. So I got to know about Tré's work when I read an article by Silas Monroe, Typography as a Radical Act in an Industry Ever Dominated by White Men. It was published by AIGA Eye on Design last year. If you have the chance to check that article, I think it's really well written. It's you know, amazing, and Tré's work is fantastic. So also, if you didn't have a chance of checking his website, please do vocaltype.co, and I invite you to do that. We used one of Tré's typefaces by art in this year's Design Month branding that was developed by Krystal. So we are very excited to have Tré giving this talk, and I'm gonna read, a short bio, and then I'm gonna, pass to Tré. So Tré is one of those rare individuals that became what he wanted to be as a child. From kindergarten to third grade, he would bounce between drawing religiously and practicing writing in cursive until he could get his handwriting to look like the sample sheets. In the 5th and 6th grades, Seals started his first business. For $3, he would graffiti people's names on index cards. In high school and college, he would design jewelry, Lego, and tattoos, posters, t-shirts. At the age of 22, he started a passion project turned foundry, VocalType. With the mission of diversifying design through type, Seals has crafted a catalog of fonts that tell stories of various underrepresented races, ethnicities, and genders, from women's suffrage movement in Argentina to the civil rights movement in the United States. So it's a pleasure to have Tré with us. Welcome, Tré.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for having me. Once again, my name is Tré Seals, and I run a font foundry called VocalType. Before I really dive in, I think it's important for you all to know that I'm a firm believer that everything happens for a reason. So this entire presentation is essentially a snapshot of my entire life and how it led to the creation of VocalType. So my journey began at the age of 4. It started with a headache and then excessive blinking, and the headaches became paralyzing. I had a brain tumor. I was born with it, and as I grew, it grew with me until it became about the size of a golf ball. Through that ordeal, drawing and writing became my only means of coping with the pain. And when the tumor was gone, I needed a way to express what I was feeling. So drawing and writing became my only means of doing that as well. So I draw to my heart's content. And when I got tired of that, I'd practice writing in cursive until I could get my handwriting to look like the sample sheets. And then about 4 years later, just when I was becoming a real kid again, I was diagnosed with a residual brain tumor. And that's when everything really changed. I was different. Not like I think we should see someone about this type of different, but more of a maturity type of different. Instead of drawing pictures of basketball players and skateboarders like I once did, I was drawing pictures of Venus de Milo, David, Greek columns, and still lifes. But beyond drawing, a lot was also going on at the time. I was diagnosed with this tumor in the 3rd grade, which was the same year I experienced racism for the first time. Then the following year, I started learning more and more about Black and brown history, which just made racism way more confusing. But in all of these experiences combined made me more observant. It made me want to understand people more. And one of the things that I started to observe was my parents and how they run their business, as they've been in business for 40 years now. And that inspired me to start my own business. So in the 5th grade, while I was supposed to be running the school store, I was convincing kids to have me graffiti their names on an index card for $3. And it was this experience that made me realize if I can make other people happy by doing what makes me happy, then that's what I need to be doing for the rest of my life. So from middle school through college, really, I designed any and everything I could. I designed tattoos, Lego jewelry, bead jewelry, posters, resumes, t-shirts, anything I could think of. But beyond selling, I started a 3-year-long personal project during my senior year of high school. I started drawing what became the basis of my very first typeface. I didn't know anything about type design or font design, but I figured one day I would and would be able to release it to the world. And finally, in 2013, I unveiled Unveil, which was supposed to be a multi-layered typeface with 5 different styles. But back then I knew a lot more about Adobe Illustrator than I knew about type design. So it's essentially a modified version of Futura with a bunch of ribbons wrapped around it. But the idea was that you can layer it to create different compositions like this. And then from time to time, I'd go back and start adding dingbacks like the star at the bottom left. And then you can start to see some of my early influences from tattoo design. Last I had checked, the font had been downloaded over 30,000 times. And I just stopped checking because I kept kicking myself for not charging at least 50 cents. But then once the hype died down, my passion really became branding, but more with a specialty in typography. So I started branding anything and everyone that I could. I even rebranded the studio that I interned for back in 2014. And just branding really became my passion. And that eventually that's what I got hired for. So in 2015, when I graduated from Stevenson University, I ended up taking a job with a staffing agency in DC, with whom I had the opportunity to work for 8 or 9 different companies full-time over the course of 2 years. And it was these experiences that made me realize what kind of designer I wanted to be and what kinds of clients and partners I wanted to work with. So I did everything. I really didn't like branding nonprofit organizations who wanted to promote coal as clean fuel. I hated that. But I loved working with realtors. I had the opportunity to brand about 100 different realtors over the course of 7 months. I actually had the opportunity to rebrand a Jewish community center, which was really interesting and just kind of shows that diversity is possible. But then one day in March of 2016, while I was branding another real estate agency, aimlessly scrolling for fonts, aimlessly scrolling for inspiration on every social media platform, I just got really bored. It was like everything I saw, no matter how beautiful it was, it all just looked the same to me. While I was looking for beauty and character and culture, all I found was monotony and stereotypes. And then a few weeks later, I came across this article called Black Designers Missing in Action. And it was the first time anyone really talked about this idea of diversity in design. And in this article, the author, Dr. Cheryl Lee Holmes Miller, brings up this idea that, like most industries, the design industry is white male dominated. But if our job as designers is to communicate different ideas and messages to Black and Brown communities, then Black and Brown designers need to have a seat at the table. And the same for female communities, LGBTQ communities, religious communities. Everyone needs to have a seat at the table, because as the world gets more and more diverse, our industry needs to catch up. But this idea of diversity in design didn't really hit me until a few weeks later, when I got this issue of Print magazine in the mail. And in this issue was the sequel to this article for the 30th anniversary, entitled Black Designers Still Missing in Action. And this version was different. It was less analytical, and it was more of her way of passing the torch to the next generation of Black designers. And it really inspired me to figure out a way to diversify design. And I knew I couldn't do that by changing demographics or the education system. But when I look back on my life and I start thinking about the days of working on Unveil, of graffitiing people's names on index cards, designing tattoos, practicing my cursive when I was young, it just made sense to start a font foundry. But at the same time, I had to ask myself, aren't there enough font foundries? And if I do this, what can I do differently? So in thinking about diversity, I had to think about all of my racial experiences as well. like all the racism and bigotry I experienced in the workplace, or the time I got stopped by 4 cops in Minneapolis, or the first time I experienced racism, or the first time I was called the N-word. But then I also had to think about my positive racial experiences, like the pride I felt in learning about Dr. King and Bayard Rustin and Eva Perón and Ruben Salazar and Dolores Huerta and so many others. And that's when I realized that typography can be more than just a design tool, but a tool for education. And thus, Vocal was born. I want to share that pride with people that I felt in the form of typography. So now Vocal creates different typefaces inspired by the histories of underrepresented cultures, from the women's suffrage movement in Argentina to the civil rights movement in America. The very first project I ever had the opportunity to work on was Martin. Martin was what I call a nonviolent typeface, inspired by remnants of the Memphis sanitation strike of 1968. It was the first time it was Dr. King's last cause before his death that April. Since releasing this typeface, I'm always amazed at the ways in which people have attached themselves to it. With the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, Martin has become a part of this Black Lives Matter movement, taking over the streets of New Jersey, being used for protest signs in Las Vegas and Denmark and all around the world. And you start to see this idea of typefaces kind of fulfilling a second round of history. So with that, Bayard was the second typeface that I ever created through Vocal. Bayard is actually named after Bayard Rustin, who was one of the organizers of the March on Washington in 1963, at which Dr. King gave his momentous "I Have a Dream" speech. And with that, this year for the 2020 virtual March on Washington put on by Reverend Al Sharpton, Bayard was actually used for the branding of this year's march. But then I'm also in love with the ways in which people use my typefaces despite their stories and despite their history. Because in my mind, that is diversifying design. It's in the same ways that English and German and Swiss cultures have been used to represent cultures globally. Eva is named after Eva Perón, who was one of the most prominent women's suffrage leaders in Argentina. Eva surprisingly was used for a men's fashion label in London. So it kind of reinforces this idea of adding culture to places where it would normally never be seen. Lastly, I want to talk about this one project in particular that I'm working on. It has no name. The history and the story behind it is unknown, but I think it's a testament to how we're all more alike than we like to admit. These images are from the women's suffrage movement in the 19-teens. These are from the anti-draft movements in the 60s. These are from the civil rights movement. And what amazes me is just when you start to overlay when you start to trace over these characters and you start to overlay them, and you start seeing all these different similarities, it really is a testament to how we're all more alike than we like to admit. Because what amazes me is that there are more images than what I've showed you. There are some in the streets of Chicago, Memphis, LA, some from the anti-apartheid movement in London and Africa, and some from the Chicano rights movement, and some from the LGBTQ rights movement. And it's not like they had internet to actually be able to copy people. And it just to me, it's just a testament to how we're all more alike than we like to admit. With that, I'd like to answer a question that I always get, and that's how can we diversify design? In my personal experience, the only way to diversify design is to be inclusive, because diversity is systemic and it will take generations before we see any real gains in diversity in terms of demographics. But inclusion is something we can all do today. All you have to do is listen and work to understand people who don't look like you, who aren't from where you're from, who don't speak the way you speak, who don't love the way you love. All you have to do is work to understand. I hope you understand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trey.
Thank you.
Wow. Wow, your work is really powerful.
Thank you so
And
much.
you know, I've been reading about your work and listening to what we have been telling about your personal story and the way your creations are being used in a way that you would never imagine. It's just it's so interesting that the fact that Eva was used in a campaign that it's for, you know, targeting men. So I assume you never know how your work is gonna be used, and that's so, I think it's just amazing.
Definitely.
So how Martin, you're talking about Martin, right? One of your most probably most famous typefaces. It got really famous, you know, recently, and I would like to understand how a kid that was born like several decades after, you know, Dr. King, it was active and fighting, how a kid gets interested in history like that.
It's kind of always been there for me. History's always kind of been a part of my life. I was born in a house built by my great-great-great-grandparents back in 1911. My dad was born and raised in that house. I was born and raised in that house. The studio that I'm in right now was actually built by my great-great-great-grandfather back in 1911, and it was used as a stable. So my office upstairs actually is where we used to store the hay, and downstairs is where the horses used to be. So history's always kind of been a part of my life. I grew up surrounded by antiques. We still have their marriage certificate from 1907 or 08. And there's just so many things that we have of them from that time. So I've always been fascinated with history.
Wow, that's amazing. And we have some questions related to you know, diversifying design through type. And one of the questions that we got from Eduardo Cazon, he's from Brazil, and his graduation project is a typeface for text, and he wants that the typeface to speak against oppression. So his work is focused on books, and he would like to know if you have some tips or ideas or references to share about revolutionary type, specifically for a text.
Definitely, that's a really hard one. I mean, you don't really see people making serif protest signs, so that's a hard one. I would say look beyond the typeface. You can learn a lot about the people who made it based on how it was made. So, for example, you may notice that at a Black Lives Matter protest, you see more people with cardboard signs, versus at the Women's March in DC, you saw more neon colored signs that were more decorative. They weren't just Sharpie. You saw hand painted signs, and you saw these pasted letters so they were expensive signs all in all. So you can learn a lot just by the materials that were used to make it. That can hint to people's economic status. What else? You can tell what resources they had access to. For example, I've recently been looking for more images around the Martin typeface. And I went looking for images at the University of Memphis Library, and I discovered that before Dr. King showed up and joined this Memphis sanitation strike, most of the signs were actually stenciled. And it was like everyone either got the same stencils from the same hardware store, or the stencils were passed around. And it really speaks to people's economic status and what resources they had access to. I would look at that and just see all the different socioeconomic factors that contributed to the birth of this typeface, what implications the typeface has. For example, I would try looking at different stereotypes in typography. For example, you'll notice that a lot of East Asian restaurants have this kind of brush script logo. Whenever you see an article that talks about a person of color, they usually use like a black weight font. There are just so many different ways to look beyond protests, and really stereotypes are just another form of oppression. So the possibilities are endless.
Yes, yes, they are. And we, so many times people just don't realize that culture is not natural, right? Is arbitrary. Right. So we are just used to see things over and over, and we end up connecting those visual aspects to a specific narrative, right? Or a story, type of storytelling. So yeah, that's really interesting. Richard Stanley from Soda is interested in getting to know if there is any traditional wood type fonts that you use as inspiration, because you mentioned like stencil, fonts created, using stencil, but is there wood type fonts that you use?
Definitely. So it wasn't until after I finished and released Martin that I found out that I found two wood type catalogs with Martin in it. One was from the American Type Founders, and one was from a 1960 Hamilton wood type catalog, where I found, and it's that weird S that I'm always searching for. That's like the most distinctive letter in the entire set. And I haven't, that's like the only wood type inspiration that I have at the moment.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that. We have another great question from Fernando. He asks, does design give us the ways and tools to strive for equality and to be inclusive? Or should we look for those means in different fields and areas? It's amazing what you wrote on your website about how you realized that design was not diverse. So if you could comment on that and on Fernando's question.
Definitely. I think the word human-centered gets thrown around a lot. And I think with that, we can't look to design to inspire everything that we do. I'm inspired by everything. I collect so many different things. I collect typewriter tins. I collect old stencils. I collect old farm crates, old pinback buttons. So with that, I think it's important to look beyond design, because design doesn't really, how can I say this? It informs culture, but it doesn't make culture. Communities do that. So with that, I would say look beyond design for inspiration, depending on what the project is. And if anything, as a graphic designer, I just work based off this idea that everything happens for a reason. So every design decision should have a reason.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and also like something that I was thinking while we were talking is that, so design is a reflection of society, basically, right? We can make some changes and be intentional, but also we are part of it's part of a culture. And so what you're saying, and I think it's what I understand, and I think it's very interesting, is that working on our communities is the way of actually, right? And maybe using design through our communities is a way of maybe changing that slowly. But again, it reflects a lot, right, what's going on. And great. You mentioned a couple of historical sources and archives that you use. Are there other, you mentioned that when we talked last week, it was really interesting, and people are asking about historical sources. Could you talk a little bit more how your process, how it starts from, how it goes?
Definitely. It kind of works in two different parts. From a research perspective, it's I start either identifying a activist or a movement, and then I try to tie that activist to a movement or that movement to a particular activist. And then I just start scaling down and looking for protests that both the activists and the movement are associated with. Mm-hmm. And then from there, I try to find typographic references that multiple people have a connection with. So one thing you'll notice with my fonts is that I never reference one protest sign made by one person. It's usually either one protest sign that 400 or 500 people carried, or a banner that 10 or 20 people carried, because it reinforces this idea of unity versus making a font based off of one sign that one person made that doesn't really connect to the activist. Mm-hmm. From there, my research process is, well, my process overall is 25% research, 25% design, 25% research, 25% design. Just in case I missed something that I didn't see in my first round of research, I might find more references that can inform the design of characters that I didn't have before, because with a revival, you really never have all the entire alphabet. So you have to use certain characters to inform the design of others. But sometimes doing that second round of research can actually help me find another source that I didn't have before.
Mm-hmm. I see. That's really cool, and it's amazing how this back and forth makes the you. I am assuming you can really see like the difference from the beginning, like testing and exploring and the end Definitely. Result. Yeah. Have you? So Fernando is asking. It's expanding a little bit the question he did before. He asked before, and he's asking specifically about do you think that graphic design is an elitist field of work? How can someone who has, for example, a hard time getting access to some resources like digital technology or specific devices could maybe not could actually get well known or perform in the graphic design field? And that's you mentioned in your presentation about how you got to this article and a couple of other articles, and how you realized that there was a specific group that is always usually represented in graphic design. So I think it's more that in this sense that he's asking the question before. And would you like to comment on that?
Definitely. That's kind of a tough one. I think that's a tough one.
Yeah, I know.
I think in terms of representation, you have to look beyond traditional means. For example, when I was starting out, I would pitch myself to every single social media channel, to every design account on Tumblr, Pinterest, Instagram, everywhere. And for me, getting known, Behance was my best friend. I got so many clients from just posting my projects on Behance. But as far as like finding inspiration from different sources, there's starting to be more and more different sites that cater to this. There's one site called People of Craft that has a directory of different creatives of color. Where else? Ion Design actually has its own diversity and inclusion section that can help you. The long story short, the resources are out there, just some are harder to find than others.
Mm-hmm. And also, I think something that you mentioned before is a sense of community. And in my opinion, like building a community and trying to keep connected, it's a way of just having these conversations. There's sometimes uncomfortable, but like finding ways, right, of like sharing resources. And that's, I think, that's what you mentioned before, like working on the community. And the graphic design community, developing it, right? We have a couple of questions, Tré, about your process. And we have the PDF that you prepared to show with the audience today, telling them, you know, the process of creating a typeface. So I think we could go over like a couple of another question, but also I was thinking that maybe you could share and explain that to us, right?
Definitely. Let me see. So for those who are looking to get into type design, one thing that I really love about it that I didn't get in graphic design was the hands-on process that's involved. I may not have to draw as much as I'd like to, but there are certain characters that you will always have to draw. S is one of the hardest characters to make, along with the ampersand. So drawing is one of the most integral parts of type design. So this PDF that I prepared for you all is essentially a breakdown of how to draw type and how type works in some cases. So as far as sketching goes, essentially you start by just scribbling until you can get the feel of a letter versus how it should look before digitization. So basically you scribble until you can continue to overlay those scribbles until you can get a better feel of what the letters should look like in the end result. And then just some things to keep in mind about like how optical sizing works. So optically, even though the top square and circle are the same height, circles just automatically look smaller to the eye. So you have to usually increase the size of round parts of every letter. For example, with this N, you have, because the top part of the N is circular or round, you have to raise it above the rectangular piece or the stem. And this applies to pretty much every character. And then we always pretty much start with a lowercase n, just because you can get about 80% of the lowercase alphabet just by using the n as a grid, for example. You can create an A by dissecting it in certain places. So like, let's say if you would cut this piece and cut this piece and then start to reflect them until you get this O shape as a grid. From there, you can start to create all of these different characters. And then as far as uppercase characters are concerned, you can get the majority of the components just from an uppercase H and an uppercase O. Using the stems or the vertical pieces of H, you can get the stems of all of these uppercase characters. And from O, you can make C, G, Q, O, you can make the round part of the J, P, R. There's so many different components that you can make just from these two characters. And then one thing to make note of is that lowercase characters always look heavier optically than uppercase characters because uppercase characters have more negative space. And with that, you have to make sure that the lowercase characters are a bit lighter than the uppercase characters. And then if you really want to get into type design, I've included 2 book references that really helped me. Designing Type is pretty much my type design Bible, and they break down the construction of every single character. And that's pretty much it for that. But if you have any other questions about designing type, I'm more than happy to help. So please feel free to reach out.
Thank you so much, Tré, for sharing that with us. It's really helpful, I'm sure. And please, we're gonna keep asking Tré questions, and it would be great if you could send your questions about what you just saw in this presentation about his process. We have another question about historical research. So going a little bit back to that. So Nisa, she says, you talked about your historical research in your design practice. Our current moment is a difficult one, but seems it will be incredibly historically impactful. Are there moments from this year that have served you as inspiration for future work? And I would like to add to that, I'm curious about what you're working, now, and what's what you're planning to release soon.
Definitely. I'm inspired by pretty much everything I see going on this year. There are so many beautiful signs that I would love to make fonts based on, but what's harder about the Black Lives Matter movement and pretty much every movement like past the year 2000 is that there's no one particular activist that you can name a font after. And that's intentional. We've had so many different activists who have been killed. And once that happened, movements have pretty much dissolved. So to modern movements, they are pretty much decentralized to prevent something like that from happening, which makes it kind of harder to name a font after one person or a particular person and kind of match the movement and the specific event to that person. So that's one of the reasons that I try to focus more historically. But also I feel like, how can I say this? I don't want to say sensitive, but I feel like people would feel like I stole something from them if I made a font based on a protest sign that from today, even though by law it's perfectly fine because it's considered a part of public exhibition, which means I can pretty much repurpose the letters from your protest sign for anything. Yeah.
So
And
what,
then-
and are you going to be releasing something soon, or what are you working on right now?
Definitely. I'm working on, I can't keep up with myself, my apologies. I'm working on one font based out of Oakland, that comes from Oakland, based on Japanese internment in the 1930s, I believe it was. The day after Pearl Harbor was bombed, a Japanese store owner actually had this hand-painted sign created to hang outside of his store that reads, "I am an American." So I'm working on a font based on that. I've been digging into type history. Recently, someone had asked why aren't more people of color involved in type? And I've been really digging into the history of the type industry and type foundries and things like that. One of the fonts that I'm actually working on has a crazy history. It was made by a foundry in Boston, but the design was actually stolen from a foundry in France. And all they did was modify the uppercase M, and they like barely modified the N, and that was it. That's the only thing they changed. And then in 1933, the American type founders renamed this font, which was called Gothic Shade, and named it Jim Crow, which is extremely racist and extremely insensitive for people in the Black community. So I'm actually remaking that and renaming it Ruby, who was the first woman or first person of color to actually integrate schools in the South. I also recently found out that type foundries actually used to create images of slaves to be used for runaway slave posters. So I'm trying to figure out if there's a way to start creating illustrations as well as type. There's just so much. I'm working on a couple of custom type projects. I'm working on releasing the William font family pretty soon, hopefully in November. So stay tuned for that. And I think that's it for now.
Wow, I can't wait to see all
Definitely.
these cool projects, coming alive. And you mentioned something about like legal aspects of reproducing or using posters from images that you find. So Yvonne asks, how do you legally protect your type design from being copied?
So that's a problem all type designers face. So you legally cannot copyright a font. You can trademark the name of a font, but you can't copyright the actual design because the Library of Congress doesn't really see different fonts as different or unique enough to copyright. So pretty much all we have to stand on is the license agreement, which basically says if you buy this font, you have to abide by this license, and then I can sue you if you don't. But outside of that, that's the only protection type designers really have for having their fonts copied.
Is there like a forum, like a place or a group that you rely on, the community of like type designers to discuss this type of issue?
Definitely. There's a forum called Type Drawers that I rely on pretty heavily. And then every type designer I know has been extremely open from from sharing their process to their pricing methods to why they have certain things within their license that other foundries don't. Uh, there's so few type designers in the world that actually practice type design full time. I believe there's 200 or 201 or something like that in the entire world that practice type design full time. So everyone's pretty open to expanding, to growing this type design community.
Yeah, I assume it's really challenging because it demands a lot of specialization, you know, and time
Definitely.
and investment. So yeah, it's great to have that community to support, like, you know, to support each other. In Latin America, there are foundries that are originally created there, and but still, like, it is, of course, there's not as much as in Europe or even in the
Right.
US, but it's, you know, it's beautiful to see the community growing because
Definitely.
of, you know, as you say, it's such an important part of any design, and it really should be diverse as much as, you know, as we are in society.
Definitely.
Yeah. So we also have another comment from, let's see, Fernando. Let me see, he mentioned something here. Thank you for the great talk and for addressing the difficult questions. He's a PhD candidate and is working on vaccination campaigns in neglected communities. So he asks, do you see many examples of design that appear to be for social justice, but have little substance? And also he says, as designers, how do you think we can evaluate our work to make sure it really has a positive impact? Or how do you evaluate your work? Or how do you get that feeling of, wow, this is something I feel good about doing? And how do you get feedback, or how it's your process?
As far as protests that I've seen that have little, I don't want to say little value, but there are like protest signs that I've seen from back when alcohol was illegal, and people carrying protest signs saying we want beer. And while it's really cool, I'm like, that's not the most important issue in your time. But just as far as, that's a tough one.
Yeah, how do you feel, like, how do you get, again, in your community, how do you get that feeling that what you're doing is, it, you know, is helping other people to express themselves? How do you keep like a connection with people via social media? How do you interact with your community to, you know, to hear?
Definitely. Especially right now, a lot through social media. And two, I'm always asking questions, which you don't see a lot of foundries do, but I would like to see more of. From the beginning on social media, I want to know what people thought about what I was working on before I even released it. Would you like to see these stylistic alternates? Should I change this? Would you use this? What would you like to see next? And things like that. I hate doing everything by myself. I love collaborating with people and meeting people. The font I was telling you about that I'm working on, Ruby, based on this font, Jim Crow, was actually recommended from someone through my Instagram account when I posed the question, what would you like to see next? I've gotten recommendations for making fonts based on the American Indian movement. Just being open. And I feel like social media is one of those places where we feel like we have to know everything and be perfect at everything, but don't make that the norm. I would just say be as open as possible. I'm open about my story, and I hope you all are too.
Yes, that's great, Tré. Thank you so much for this conversation. I think it's really great that people keep sending us questions, and we only have a few minutes left. And I want to check here. We have, maybe can do one more question here. So we have a technical question.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about desktop and web font licenses. Can you explain the difference between your desktop and web font licenses? Are customers able to use your font to make posters or a logo?
Definitely. I am not greedy. So with a desktop license, you can make pretty much anything printed or any static image. So you can make posters, t-shirts, social media posts. You can make images for your website. You just can't embed the font on a website. You would have to buy a web font license specifically to use a font on a website that isn't an image. So for example, you can put a picture of a protest sign using my font on your website. You just can't have the headline or anything like, or any of the navigation or anything like that be set with my fonts without a web font license.
Awesome. So we have, as I said, only a few minutes left, and I guess we could just leave it like an open-ended for you to say, you know, a few words about this experience of sharing your work with us, and maybe inviting people to check Vocal Type's website.
Definitely. Please check out the website vocaltype.co. Follow me on Instagram, which is also at vocaltype.co. My email address is beheard@vocaltype.co. If you have any questions, or feel free to message me on social media. I'm open. I'd like to help however I can. Please feel free to download the PDF of the How to Draw Type. And then, just as a thank you for all of you coming today, you can have 20% off of the Vocal Type site using the code uppercase BMORE, BMORE.
Thank you so much, Tré. Wow, that's a great treat. And so again, I invite you to check Tré's work online and follow him on Instagram, on social media. He's really like a really great type designer, and I think it's, you know, as much as possible, we want to spread the word about his work. So thank you again, Tré. I want to invite you all to check also what AIGA Baltimore's profile on Instagram. We have our Type Walk Challenge going on. The idea is to create a collage with our unique and united theme. So we invite you to go outside and take pictures and collect images of each individual character, unique and united, and we're gonna probably be leaving this challenge open until the end of the month. Share to social media with the hashtag BeMoreDM20, and please tag us. We are doing this daily challenge, right? So for each character, and submit your collage to us. We want to check out your ideas, and we're gonna be choosing the winner and soon, and we're gonna have a Skillshare subscription is gonna be the prize. So I invite you to take a look at that on our social media. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you all for being with us, and take care. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone.